What could drive a 16-year-old girl to murder a complete stranger? It's the kind of question that stops you in your tracks, and for good reason. We all think we know what makes someone capable of such a terrible act. Anger, revenge, fear. But what if none of those things were at play? What if instead it was something darker, something that no one could have seen coming? The victim in this case was a quiet, unsuspecting Uber driver, just doing his job. His name was Grant Nelson, a 35-year-old man who lived an ordinary life. No criminal record, no enemies, just a man earning a living, transporting passengers from one place to another. He didn't deserve to die, no one does. But one fateful night, that's exactly what happened. Grant Nelson picked up a 16-year-old girl, Eliza Wasni, for a routine ride. What happened next was anything but routine. By the end of the night, Grant's life was tragically cut short. He was murdered in cold blood. And what followed was a mystery that would leave investigators scratching their heads, unsure of how to make sense of a crime that seemed senseless. At first, investigators were left with little to go on. There were no obvious clues, no signs of struggle, nothing that made sense. What could possibly drive a young girl to murder a stranger? There were no clear answers, no immediate motive. The investigation seemed to stall, leaving detectives more frustrated with every passing day. They sifted through the evidence, interviewing witnesses, studying the scene, and even looking at Grant's past, but nothing pointed them in the right direction. It felt as though the case would remain unsolved. Just another tragic, senseless death with no resolution. But then something happened. A single piece of evidence emerged. It wasn't much, just a small detail, but it changed everything. Security footage from a nearby camera revealed a crucial clue. Eliza Wasni, the seemingly innocent 16-year-old girl, was seen getting into the car with Grant. In the blink of an eye, the investigation took a sharp turn. Now, the question wasn't just about who did it, it was about why. Why would a teenager, someone with no criminal record and no obvious reason to commit such an act, murder a complete stranger? What could possibly have gone wrong? What did she know that no one else did? As the investigation continued, investigators began to piece together more and more about Eliza's life. They learned that her family life wasn't as perfect as it appeared, but even then the question remained, how did this all lead to murder? What exactly was going on in Eliza's mind when she decided to take Grant's life? It wasn't just about identifying the killer anymore. This case had turned into a deeper question about human nature, about what could drive a young girl to commit such an unthinkable act. Could it be as simple as a moment of rage? Or was there something more, something deeper, that led Eliza down a path of violence and murder? This case would challenge everything you think you know about the psychology of crime. It would expose the fragility of the human mind, and it would raise questions that we all try to ignore. What happens when something snaps? What drives someone to commit murder without warning, without motive, without reason? As the investigation unfolded, more shocking revelations came to light. But the one thing that everyone kept asking themselves was, what made a 16-year-old girl, someone who seemed so ordinary, commit such a horrific crime? What was her true motive? In the end, the truth was far more unsettling than anyone could have predicted. And it left investigators, and everyone who heard the story, questioning the very nature of evil. Was this a random act of violence? Or was there something deeper at play, something that had been brewing beneath the surface all along? Grant Nelson, a 35-year-old Uber driver from Wilmette, Illinois, who had lived a quiet, simple life. He wasn't rich or famous. He was just a regular guy trying to get by. He had no enemies, no obvious dangers lurking in his life. But on the night of May 30th, 2017, everything changed. Grant picked up a ride that would be his last. The passenger was a young woman, 16 years old. Her name was Eliza Wasni. At first glance, she seemed like any other teenager, seemingly polite, maybe a little shy, but nothing out of the ordinary. No one, least of all Grant, could have known that this would be the last ride of his life. They set off, driving through the quiet streets, the kind of ride Grant had done thousands of times before. There was nothing remarkable about the trip, but just a few minutes into the ride, everything took a turn for the worse. The sudden, violent nature of what would transpire next was something no one could have predicted. What happened next was nothing short of terrifying. Without warning, Eliza attacked Grant. The knife she had hidden in her possession was driven into his body multiple times, each stab leaving a trail of blood behind. The brutality of the attack was chilling. He was stabbed not once, not twice, but several times, by a girl who, just moments ago, seemed like she had no reason to harm him. Grant Nelson was left fighting for his life in the backseat of his car. He tried to defend himself, but the situation escalated too quickly, and his life slipped away in the span of just a few minutes. The scene was chaotic, brutal. There was no warning, no struggle leading up to the moment when Eliza's attack ended Grant's life. By the time law enforcement responded, the damage had been done. Grant was found in his car, lifeless and covered in blood. There was no obvious explanation, no sign of a struggle, no clues left behind that might explain why someone so young and seemingly innocent would commit such a brutal crime. The questions began immediately. What could possibly have driven Eliza to do this? Was it a random act of violence? Or was there something deeper, something more personal, that had pushed her to such an extreme? Why would a 16-year-old murder a man she barely knew? Investigators quickly realized this wasn't just any ordinary crime. Something was off about this situation, something they couldn't quite figure out. At first, it seemed like there was no clear motive. Eliza had no criminal history, no ties to any dangerous individuals. She was just a teenager, seemingly with a normal life ahead of her. Yet the act of murder was so shocking, so senseless, that it couldn't be dismissed as a random event. The pieces didn't add up, and it left everyone, from law enforcement to family members, struggling to make sense of it. As the investigation progressed, a picture of Eliza began to emerge, but it was one that raised even more questions. What had driven her to murder? Was there something buried beneath the surface of her seemingly normal life that no one had seen coming? The case of Grant Nelson's death would haunt those involved in the investigation, as they would come to realize that the truth behind the crime was much darker than anyone could have imagined. What happened in those moments between Eliza and Grant that turned a routine Uber ride into a horrific act of violence? Why did Eliza take a life that night? The answers would soon follow, but they would leave everyone in shock as they pieced together the chilling truth behind the murder. Detectives arrived at the scene, only to find Grant in critical condition, his body bloodied and bruised, barely clinging to life. He had managed to pull the car over and stumble out, desperately seeking help. His injuries were severe, deep knife wounds to his chest and torso. And yet, even in those final moments, he fought to speak. Gasping through the pain, he uttered a name. A girl. She stabbed me. And then clearly and deliberately, Eliza Wasni. It was the only clue they had. A name. No explanation, no motive. Just a dying man pointing to a teenage girl as the one who had attacked him. Moments later, Grant Nelson was pronounced dead at the hospital. But that didn't answer the bigger question. Why? Why would a 16-year-old girl, someone who should have been thinking about school, friends, maybe summer plans, carry out such a violent, personal attack against someone she didn't even know? Grant had simply picked her up for a routine Uber ride. He'd done nothing to provoke her. There had been no argument, no shouting, not even a hint that something was wrong until the moment the knife came out. Detectives at the scene were left with more questions than answers. There were no witnesses inside the vehicle, no surveillance from inside the car. Just blood, lots of it, and a panicked call from Grant during his final moments. The Uber app confirmed the trip. It had started normally. Eliza had requested a ride from a location in Skokie, Illinois, to a nearby destination. What detectives quickly discovered, however, was that the pickup location wasn't random. Just minutes before she got into Grant's car, Eliza had been inside a nearby Walmart. There she had stolen 2 weapons, a machete and a knife. Security footage from the Walmart confirmed it. She had walked into the store, moved through the aisles, taken the items, and exited without paying. No one stopped her. No one thought anything of it. She appeared calm, composed, like she was just any other teenager browsing late at night. She then ordered the Uber. Grant picked her up just minutes later. Investigators began to retrace every second of that timeline. They reviewed the footage. They interviewed Walmart employees. They questioned anyone who may have seen her that night. And what they kept coming back to was how calculated it all seemed. Eliza had gone into that store with a plan. She hadn't panicked. She hadn't acted erratically. And the choice of weapons, large sharp blades, didn't feel random. Yet when they asked why, no one could answer. Her family was in disbelief. Her school records showed nothing unusual. She had no violent history, no disciplinary issues. She was quiet, reserved, the kind of girl who kept to herself but never gave anyone a reason to worry. And still, she had carried out one of the most cold-blooded attacks they'd seen in recent memory. Police began searching for Eliza immediately after Grant's statement. She had fled the scene on foot, leaving behind the bloodied car and her dying victim. Within an hour, officers located her hiding behind an office building, still wearing a stained "Keep Calm" sweatshirt and in possession of the knife and machete. She refused to speak. She didn't explain. She just looked at them, silent. Detectives had her in custody, but they were no closer to understanding what had happened inside that car. What they knew was simple. A man was dead. A 16-year-old was responsible. And the motive, still completely unclear. The randomness of it all, that's what disturbed investigators the most. There was no fight, no confrontation, no reason. Just a ride request and a brutal, unprovoked attack. It didn't make sense. And as detectives continued to dig, they started to wonder, was this really random? Or was there something deeper hiding beneath the surface? The truth was coming, but it wouldn't make the case any easier to understand. It would only make it harder. At first glance, Eliza Wasni appeared to be just another teenager. She was soft-spoken, seemingly harmless, a girl who would blend into the crowd. There was nothing in her appearance or demeanor that suggested she could commit such an act. She was 16 years old, a student at Taft High School in Chicago. Friends described her as quiet, sometimes withdrawn, but never aggressive. Teachers said she didn't stand out. She did her work, kept to herself, and stayed out of trouble. She had no known history of violence, no criminal record, no warning signs that could have pointed to what was coming. But when detectives began to piece together her movements that night, the picture started to change. Just before midnight on May 29th, Eliza had snuck out of her house. She made her way to a local Walmart in Skokie. There, she wandered the aisles alone. Surveillance footage would later show her calmly selecting a machete and a large knife. She didn't pay for them. She simply walked out. No panic, no hesitation. That act alone signaled something was wrong. Most teenage shoplifters might steal makeup, snacks, or clothes. But weapons? And not just any weapons. Bladed weapons, clearly capable of serious harm. From there, she opened the Uber app and requested a ride. It wasn't random. She didn't ask to be dropped off at a specific person's house or a place of interest. Her destination was close by. Investigators would later consider the possibility that the destination was meaningless, that she didn't actually intend to go anywhere. The Uber driver assigned to her ride was Grant Nelson. In the vehicle, she sat quietly. According to later reports, there was no conversation, no indication that anything was wrong. But within minutes of the ride beginning, and just after crossing into Lincolnwood, she pulled out the knife and began stabbing Grant from the back seat. The wounds were deep. She struck him multiple times, aiming for the chest and side. As he tried to stop the car and call for help, she bolted. She left him bleeding on the road and ran off into the night. She didn't go far. An hour later, she was found hiding behind an office building, still carrying both weapons. She refused to speak to officers. She didn't cry, she didn't resist, and she didn't offer any explanation. It was as if she had already said everything she needed to say through her actions. Investigators scoured her social media, her phone, her school records. They talked to her friends and family. What they discovered was unsettling. In the days leading up to the murder, Eliza had been acting strangely. She was more withdrawn than usual. She had stopped talking to some of her closest friends. She had become obsessed with violent content online. Movies, videos, even news reports. But none of it explained the why. There was no feud, no personal history with Grant, no evidence of mental illness, no documented trauma that could have triggered the violence. And yet, she had done it, deliberately, without hesitation. When she was eventually taken in for questioning, she remained silent. Her Miranda rights were read, her legal guardians were called, but even in the presence of attorneys, she had nothing to say. The courtroom would later see her sitting quietly, often avoiding eye contact, emotionless. A girl of just 16, charged with first-degree murder. Was it a cry for help? A sudden break from reality? Or something else? Something far more calculated? The question on everyone's mind wasn't just how she did it, but what had made her want to in the first place. Because if someone like Eliza Wasni, young, quiet, seemingly normal, could do this, what else was she capable of? And more importantly, could it have been stopped? Investigators kept searching for something, anything that might explain her state of mind. But the more they uncovered, the more unsettling the picture became. The clothing she wore that night? Dark, intentional. The way she walked through that Walmart? Measured, focused. Surveillance footage showed no signs of anxiety, no second thoughts. She moved like she knew what she was doing and why. And what she chose to steal, a machete and a knife, was no coincidence. Those weren't impulsive grabs off a shelf. She knew exactly what she needed. She left the store as calmly as she entered. And the ride she ordered, Uber, was just a means to an end. Grant Nelson didn't pick up a passenger that night. He picked up a plan. During the short trip, he had no idea what was about to happen. He didn't know the girl in his back seat had just stolen 2 deadly weapons. He didn't know that his car was now the stage for an act she had already rehearsed in her mind. There were no screams before the attack, no warning, just silence. And then, violence. She stabbed him over a dozen times, in the chest, in the side, in the face. As he pulled over and stumbled out of the car, bleeding, desperately trying to find help, Eliza ran, not out of fear, but because it was time for the next part. She still had the weapons. She ran into a nearby building, hid, changed her clothes, tried to blend in. And for a few hours, she succeeded, until officers found her barefoot, hiding behind an air conditioning unit, the knife and machete still with her. Even then, she said nothing. It was only later that her defense would raise the issue of mental illness, suggesting Eliza had been suffering from undiagnosed schizophrenia. But the court would have to wrestle with something far more difficult than a diagnosis. Was this the act of a sick child in need of help, or a dangerous individual in full control of her actions? The prosecutors didn't see confusion. They saw intent. They saw a girl who planned a murder, carried it out, and tried to escape the consequences. The surveillance footage, the silence, the calm. All of it pointed to one thing: deliberate action. Eliza Wasni never testified, but her silence said enough. And as the courtroom listened to the details, one thing became clear. This wasn't just a case about violence, it was a case about absence. The absence of motive, the absence of emotion, the absence of warning. In the end, Eliza Wasni pled guilty to first-degree murder. She was sentenced to 27 years in prison. She showed little reaction, and still no one ever heard the answer to the question that haunted everyone who followed the case. Why? Why Grant? Why that night? Why did a 16-year-old girl, without a word, choose to take the life of a man she had never met? No one has ever been able to answer that question, and perhaps no one ever will. What do you think really happened that night? Was Eliza Wasni a troubled teen acting out in a moment of confusion? Or was this something deeper, something far more calculated? Could there have been a chance to stop it, to recognize the signs before it was too late? Or was this one of those tragedies that no one could have seen coming? We want to hear from you. What do you believe drove a 16-year-old girl to kill a complete stranger? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Share your theories. Talk with others who are just as puzzled by this case. And if you found this story as haunting as we did, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another deep dive into the world of true crime. Because sometimes the darkest stories come from the most unexpected places, and they're never as far away as we think.